service about connections between ideas and connections between people and connections between the kind of work that we are called to do as Unitarian Universalists. And the genesis of this sermon was a series of connections that I sort of went off in my head one day as I was reading, of all things, a science article in the online magazine Slate. So, for better or worse, we're going to go on a magical journey together, tracing those connections in my head, and we'll see where we end up. So, one Friday night in 1997, a Russian-born physicist named Andrei Geim was working in his lab at the University of Manchester, and he got this nagging idea in his head about magnetism. He was curious about something. So he walked over to his department's extremely powerful, extremely expensive electrode. He powered it up, he cranked it to maximum power, he turned it up to 11, and then he dumped a glass of water right down the middle of it. And what happened after that wasn't supposed to happen, although it's probably very fortunate for him that it did, because the water, rather than spilling everywhere and potentially damaging the extremely expensive equipment, slowed as it fell through that gravitational field, and it stopped. And then it broke into sort of globules like you might see in a science fiction movie, and it started suspending itself and floating upward. The water was levitating, propelled against the force of gravity by magnetism. Now, this was unexpected, to put it mildly, because water is not really that magnetic. It's 1 billion times less magnetic than iron. So no one had supposed that a magnet, however powerful, could move water through space. But as it turns out, it can. And that's how this guy figured that out. So fresh off of this unexpected triumph, Geim did the next logical thing. If I can levitate water, he thought, it stands to reason I can levitate a frog. And so if you go to YouTube today and you type in levitating frog, you will find a 10-second video of a weensy frog hovering in midair, rotating freely in a magnetic field. I can't really read its expression, but I assure you, no frogs were harmed in the making of this video. Magnetism does not hurt you. So, Geim won a prize for this experiment. In 2000, he won the Ig Nobel Prize, a coveted award given for experiments that, quote, first make people laugh and then make them think. Later, in 2010, he won the more commonplace but still well-regarded Nobel Prize in physics for his groundbreaking work with the substance graphene, which is the starting point of our first connection. He did that in collaboration with a colleague, Konstantin Novoselov. And the two awards, Nobel and Ig Nobel, are not actually unrelated, because it was the spirit of the flying frog that propelled their breakthrough with this substance, graphene. So, what is graphene? This is a press release announcing the award of the 2010 Nobel Prize from ScienceDaily.com. It reads, "The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for 2010 to Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov for groundbreaking experiments regarding the two-dimensional material graphene. Graphene is a form of carbon. Specifically, it is a sheet of carbon exactly 1 atom thick. Not only is it, as a material, it is completely new, not only the thinnest ever, but also the strongest, 100 times stronger than steel. As a conductor of electricity, it performs as well as copper. As a conductor of heat, it outperforms all other known materials. It is almost completely transparent, yet so dense that not even helium, the smallest gas atom, can pass through it. Carbon, the article concludes, the basis of all known life on Earth, has surprised us once again." So, if it's the carbon that is doing all of the work being awesome, why did these two guys get the Nobel Prize? Because prior to their work, no one knew how to create graphene. They had theorized about what it might do if you could get it to exist, although no one was even sure if you could get it to exist, because could you really have a layer 1 atom thick, or would it just kind of fall apart? Nobody knew. up until 2004, when Gaim and Navosa made it in their lab using the unlikeliest tools. And the method in their madness was the madness in their method. It was the spirit of the flying frog. Because they had made a tradition, his team, out of the spirit of improvisation and play. They called it their Friday night experience. Crazy stunts that probably would never work, but boy, if they did, look out. Gaim says he made it a point to devote 10% of his research to these experiments, which were all necessarily unfunded because they were crazy, but that's what he did. He attempted about 24 of these Friday night experiments. 3 of them were successful. The first was the flying frog. The second was the creation of gecko tape, which is an adhesive tape that mimics gecko feet and their ability to stick to things. And the third was the Nobel Prize-winning isolation of graphene. And this is how they set about having that breakthrough. First, they set out to do it in the first place despite the fact that they did not know what they were doing and they had no expertise in this at all. But that's perfect. That's well within the spirit of crazy experience, doing that which you have no clue what you're doing. They read the literature, right? They familiarized with it, but not too much because they wanted to remain kind of amateurs. They didn't want other people's ideas crowding their heads and blocking off creative thinking. So they started with a pencil because pencil lead is graphite, which is carbon, and they took these crazy, complicated machines and they tried slicing off these really thin layers, and they put it on a slide, and then you take some tape and you kind of clean the dust off the slide so you have a nice image. Put it under your super expensive microscope, and they failed every time. It wasn't thin enough, or they would crush it to powder in the process of slicing it, or whatever they were doing, it was not working. Until one day they discovered that the Scotch tape that they were throwing away every night was actually peeling off thinner layers of carbon than any machine that they had attempted to use. So that's brilliant. So they took some Scotch tape and they would kind of tape it back and forth off of itself until they finally got their 1 atom thick layer of carbon and they could begin the research, and for that they won the Nobel Prize. And that's actually how graphene is still extracted today. It's called the Scotch tape technique. So, brilliant scientists doing brilliant things. One of my favorite things in the world. That is connection 1. Connection 2. So the first connection from there is batteries. Anytime I read about a new material that's been invented or a really big scientific breakthrough in physics or chemistry, the very first question I ask is, can it make a lightsaber? Because I've been waiting 36 years now for someone to make a lightsaber, and it's never happened. But the second question I ask is, will it make a better battery? And the reason that I care about batteries is because the other G in the title of our sermon today, global warming, the slow-moving, ever-looming environmental apocalypse that awaits us if we do not make a significant reduction in fossil fuel use. Now, that means we have to start changing some of our things that we do, like the cars that we drive and the way that we make power. And a big obstacle to switching to electric cars is batteries. You need really good batteries to have electric cars. And a big obstacle to using green power like solar and wind is the wind doesn't blow all the time, and the sun doesn't shine all the time. So you've got intermittent power, so you have to store it so that you can convert it into a reliable source that you can use all the time. So that means for solar power and wind power, you need batteries. It's a significant obstacle in making these changes. The batteries are expensive, they're bulky, they're toxic, they're not very efficient. So our global warming problem is crying out for a breakthrough in battery technology. And unfortunately for us, battery technology is pretty old. It's a well-solved problem. It uses a handful of well-understood materials. Thomas Edison once said, if someone tells you they have a wonderful new battery, disbelieve them. Thomas Edison said that way back in 18... But they did not have graphene back in T-Zeddy's day. And it is a weird, wacky substance with near miraculous properties. And they think one of the applications of graphene, among many, just might be a better battery. A much better battery. Possibly even a revolutionary battery. You can Google graphene battery if you want the details. They're working on it, and time will tell. But my fingers are officially crossed. So, crazy scientists, graphene, batteries. That got me thinking about another interview. Global warming, batteries to global warming got me thinking about another interview. This time with a young UU minister, the Reverend Ian Mayer. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Reverend Mayer is launching a new congregation in Brooklyn called Original Blessing, which is an emerging congregation that is focused on bringing a UU message of love and service to Brooklyn, where UU congregations are actually pretty thin on the ground. And so they did an online interview with him. I don't know if people know this. UU actually has an hour-long interview show that they do every week that you can find on YouTube. Ministers talking about Unitarian Universalism. And yes, it's just as interesting as you would expect. It's just that intense. But anyway, Reverend Mayer, in his interview, he's talking about the work that he wants to do with his new congregation, particularly in regards to the ecological crisis. And he said, the only solution to our coming ecological collapse is a spiritual solution. There's some sort of spiritual transformation that has to occur, he said. A transcendental experience of solidarity with all of being, where you experience all of life as kin, where you have a relationship with the planet in its physical life and its spiritual life. Well, that's about making connections, so I liked that. And that had me nodding my head because we've talked about similar themes here. In particular, we did a service in April, I think, about the concept of dominion and how we needed a new way of understanding our relationship to the world and of living that relationship with the world. But then he said something else that brought me up a little short. He said, the only solution is a spiritual solution. We're not going to think our way out of this. We're not going to think our way out of this. Which I thought was interesting because there was a time not too long ago when the last thing that you would ever expect a Unitarian minister to say is, we're not going to think our way out of this. Right? We are steeped in this humanist tradition of science and progress with a belief in the near limitless technological progress. Almost an article of faith because it's a corollary to our faith in the limitless powers of the human mind, armed with the power of reason. Our tradition largely has a heroic view of science. Scientists are the heroes of the modern world. And so a traditional humanist Unitarian view would see global warming as basically a technological problem. It's an unfortunate artifact of the way we do things to get better computers and food and travel, etc., right? We want those things, we do them, and as a byproduct we get global warming, which is a technological problem, and the solution, therefore, is also going to be technological. Better batteries, better solar panels, electric cars, carbon capture, what have you. We're going to think our way out of this. But Reverend Mayer is not a Unitarian, he's a Unitarian Universalist. With our seventh principle of respect for the interdependent web of life at the core of his spiritual training, and he's coming from kind of a different place. And so, like many modern Unitarian Universalists, he sees global warming not as a technology problem, but as a relational problem. The harm that we are doing to our planet, the harm that we are doing to our fellow creatures, is proof that we have fallen out of right relationship with it and them. And so the solution is not technology, it's love. It's the experience of that transforming love that he's talking about that takes us out of our egos and out of our narrow conception of ourselves that we're separate from each other and that we're separate from the world and from life. And it moves us back into unity with the whole. And that's very much a universalist message. Love restoring wholeness. Love restoring wholeness. So the theme of General Assembly this year is love reaches out. Our bright yellow t-shirts say we're standing on the side of love. One of the most popular descriptions of UU right now going around the internet is love beyond belief. And one of the most popular statements of our mission, also going on the internet, is that we're going to love the hell out of the world. So Unitarian Universalism right now is very much riding this universalist wave, and there's a lot of exciting stuff going on with that. And I'm an unabashed fan of both sides of our heritage. One of the things that I really like about Unitarian Universalism is it has these two strands, the Unitarian and the Universalist, and when you weave them together, the reason, thinky, progress strand with the love, relational, transformational strand, I think you get a very complete religion, a very deep religion. And so I would say that our ecological crisis is both a technological problem, and a relational, a spiritual problem. It does require us to evolve as a global society into new ways of being, into new ways of relating to each other. So it is about making connections in different ways. But that takes time. You don't just change society overnight, and we don't have a lot of time. So in the meantime, the technological solutions are critically needed to buy us time. And to the extent that we are already out of time, they are critically needed to lessen the harm that we have already done. Now it goes beyond that. New technologies can open up and facilitate new ways of relating and new ways of making connections, the internet being the most obvious example. Scientific discovery feeds our sense of awe and wonder, which can pull us into a deeper felt relationship with creation. It gives us a richer understanding of our part in the story of the universe, and it helps us see how precious it is and how worthy of our preservation and our protection it is. So I would hope that as a religious people, we uphold a vision for young people that is both, that says there's a way of relating to life that's more generous, more loving, more hopeful, more connected than hyper-individualist consumer capitalism. But I would hope the same vision would also say, get thee to a slide rule, young person. Or perhaps a more modern tool of science, but get cracking. Because we desperately need the next generation of brilliant young minds. And now more than ever, we need those minds to be doing science and engineering and math. And we need that vision that is part of our heritage as a religious movement of science and invention and intellectual discovery as heroism, as the human being at their best. So that brings me to my final point of connection. An interview with another famous scientist, start with a famous scientist, end with a famous scientist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, most popularly known currently as the host of the New Cosmos. So Dr. Tyson, per our second reading, was asked at a conference to comment on ex-Harvard President Larry Summers' now infamous comment that women were underrepresented in math and science because of genetic differences. Right? That was what he speculated. And Dr. Tyson's response, which was our second reading, highlighted the extent to which our society discourages so many young minds from engaging in this very important work. All I can say, said Dr. Tyson, is the fact that I wanted to be a scientist. The fact that I wanted to be a scientist was hands down the path of most resistance through the forces of society. He gives a few examples of this in another interview, this with the UT Alumnus magazine in 2012. He said, the first comment directed to me in the first minute of the first day by a faculty member when I arrived at UT was, you must join the department basketball team. He says, I was stopped and questioned 7 times by university police on my way into the physics building. 7 times. 0 times, he says, was I stopped going into the gym. Okay, so that's Dr. Tyson's story. There are doubtless countless stories like it out there. I know from my own experiences when I was a graduate student talking to other women who were graduate students in mathematics, that women of my generation were still told directly by academic advisors, don't go into math because women cannot do math. And when they got in, if they persevered, they still faced sexual harassment that was significant and pervasive. A study recently done at Princeton revealed the not shocking result that white male students are more likely to get chosen for internships and mentoring They just emailed out requests for mentoring, and based on whether your name sounded white and male, you were much more likely to get access to a professor. And internships and mentoring are the lifeblood of advancement in academia, so this is a significant hindrance. And of course, before our children get anywhere near a college, they must run the gauntlet of class, race, and sex in modern America. Right? Where poor children have less access to safe, high-quality education, where children of color are subject to discrimination, their neighborhoods are devastated by a century of redlining and urban renewal policies, and our war on drugs and its practice of mass incarceration, where women are subject to a culture that still trivializes them and exposes them to harassment and violence. This is an illustration of what I mean when I say the culture trivializes women. Has anyone ever heard of the Bechdel test? Just out of curiosity. The Bechdel test? Just a couple of hands. The Bechdel test is named for a cartoonist, Alison Bechdel, who invented it. And it's a test of female representation in the movies, or a book, or any work of culture. But it's a very simple test. It asks three things. Are there two female characters? Do they have a conversation with each other about something besides a guy? And if you add the fourth criteria that these two women have to have names, as somebody it turns out that they examined like 4,500 movies, and about half of them failed to pass this very simple test. Two women with names having a conversation about something besides a dude. So these forces of class and race and sex, they are real, they conspire to reduce opportunities, and they carry a psychic toll. I wonder, Dr. Tyson uses, who are the blood on the tracks? Who are the ones who didn't make it through that gauntlet? And I wonder myself, through these connections, what were their brilliant ideas, and what were their beautiful dreams that never got developed, never got nourished, never got realized, and at what cost? So at the end of my mental trip through these various connections, it reminded me of how interrelated our Unitarian Universalist principles are, and how all of our ideals really work together and hold together. Because I started out thinking about our seventh principle, the interdependent web of life, and I really ended up thinking about our first principle, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all people, and our second principle, which talks about justice and equity, fairness for all. In America, the greatest obstacle in the end to overcoming our ecological crisis may well turn out to be our legacy of racism and patriarchy and the damage that it does. The greatest obstacle may turn out to be classism and the ways in which we isolate and neglect those people who don't have economic resources and drive them even further into deprivation. Now, of course, we want to change these things out of love. But also, more and more, our lives and well-being literally depend on it. And there's no conflict here because when we truly understand how interdependent we all are, the idealism of our religion and the practicality of our religion, they're the same thing. Love is what we want, and love is what makes sense, and love is what will save us. So last connection, and this one is purely a fortuitous one. Couldn't believe this one. Friday night, as I am sketching out the outlines of this sermon, Ray Wilson, who's on the board of trustees and also is involved in the Green Team, he forwarded me an email from Reverend Karen Brammer, who's the director of the Unitarian Universalist Association's Green Sanctuary Program. And what that means is the UUA, which is our big umbrella organization, they have a Green Sanctuary Program. Congregations apply to it. They do certain steps to demonstrate and to deepen their commitment to the environment, and they become certified green sanctuary. And we are a certified green sanctuary, so it's something that we're very proud of and that we worked hard for. So Karen Brammer, the director, sent an email out to all of the green sanctuary congregations. And she says, "Dear fellow UU, we know that we can no longer do environmental work as though it is not connected to other oppressions like racism and classism that plague our communities and our worlds." To which I said, "Great minds, Karen Brammer." The letter then invites us to deepen in our environmental work by making connections, by reaching out to marginalized communities and partnering with them, by forming working relationships with people across our sort of traditional UU membership, by taking the risk to reach across class and cultural boundaries and create coalitions. And UUI is already on that path. We do work with Interfaith Powered Light, which is an interfaith coalition. After the service today, our young adults group is going to go down to the 27th Street Community Garden and to volunteer there outside of our usual neighborhood. And this isn't easy work. Interfaith work, cross-cultural work, it takes tenacity, it takes patience, it takes a willingness to be vulnerable and to fail and to try again. But it brings us back full circle to connections and our first reading by the poet Marge Piercy. She said, "Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. May it be a harvest of love." Would you please rise in body and spirit for our closing?